So the original Russia's original plan was evidently to go into the Ukraine very quickly, advance very quickly on all fronts, right? Coming in everywhere except the West, obviously, right? So coming in from the north, from Belarus, they're coming in from the northeast in the direction of Kharkov and Sumy, and coming in from the south from Crimea, and then heading north into towards Kherson and Nikolaev, and then east towards Mariupol. So they're really, and of course, then advancing the Donbass as well. So they were really coming from most directions and moving very quickly. And the intent was to advance as fast as possible, get to Kiev, and just hope that the Ukrainian government gets really, really intimidated and basically collapses, and that some sane forces in the Ukrainian state, and oligarchs, business interests, whatever, people with property in Russia, that they would sort of force Zelensky to come to his senses and strike a deal and give the Russians what they want. And that did not happen. Clearly, there was some disintegration of the Ukrainian army, particularly in the southern direction, in Kherson and Zaporozhye provinces. The Ukrainian army there simply disintegrated. They just dropped their equipment and ran away by the thousands and thousands. But the other fronts, for the most part, they did not come apart like they did in the south. And so what happened was the Russians were advancing very quickly, and in fact, they moved from the border near Sumy in the northeast to west to Kiev, into the eastern outskirts of Kiev, and it's about 340 miles. And they covered that distance in something like 10 days. I mean, it was just an incredible rate of advance. Now, I know that a lot of you folks think, hey, I could drive 340 miles in a day, right? Well, not if, there's people potentially shooting at you and you can't get ahead of your air defense and so forth, right? An advance of 30 kilometers a day is considered, just amazing. And they did that, day in and day out, and got to the point where they were at least notionally holding a lot of territory. If you remember seeing the maps, from the first days and weeks of the war, and the Russians supposedly had this very large chunk of land that was in northeast Ukraine, and something like the size of New York State or Pennsylvania. It was just a very large piece of land. And the problem is for them, they didn't really control it, right? They controlled the ground under their feet, right? They controlled the road that they were on, and that was it. They did not have the manpower because they were spread out all over the place. And they did not have the manpower to secure their rear, or to secure cities that they passed or towns that they passed. And so they left very considerable Ukrainian forces behind them, and just kind of put up some checkpoints and try to make it difficult for those forces to move around and to leave the towns that they were hiding in. But otherwise, they didn't really control much territory at all. And mostly that presence in northeast Ukraine that looked like it was the size of New York State, really, they basically controlled one road going from about the Russian border to Kiev, about 340 to 350 miles. And, didn't really control a hell of a lot more than that. So a lot of those maps were nonsense. But so what happened is, again, they left a very considerable forces in their rear, especially enemy forces in their rear areas, especially in the northeast and around Kharkov also. And they also left quite a bit in reserve. They left a lot of forces in reserve in the Crimea and Belarus and Russia that did not cross into Ukraine, and they were, waiting to figure out where they would need those forces. However, when you have no prospects on any given front, it's hard to know where to commit your reserves, right? So they didn't really commit those reserves for a long time. And as far as Kiev, they were never going to take Kiev without a political settlement. I mean, that was sort of an intimidation presence. It was not that they were, going to go into the city of millions of people and just, blow it up and have, like take it like Berlin 1945. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous. That was not the intent. And so when they realized that, hey, look, these guys are not rolling over. They're not playing dead. They're playing the long game and basically following the instructions from Uncle Sam that just keep fighting and we'll support you all the way. So at that point, they realized that the Russian side realized that, look, this, holding all this territory and trying to encircle Kiev and surround Kiev, it's pointless because they're not gonna they're not just gonna roll over, and we're not gonna go into Kiev, right? So at that point they pulled back. They pulled out of all of northern and northeastern Ukraine, and this was from the end of March, right? And then they got their equipment back on the rails and redeployed and are still redeploying it to the Donbass. So what's the moral of the story here? The moral of the story here is that Plan A did not work, right? They took some pretty not heavy but noticeable losses just by the fact that they were single-mindedly just trying to drive down the road into the Ukraine as fast as possible and as far as possible, and leaving too much of the enemy in their rear areas. And so they had some partisan activity. People taking pot shots at their supply columns, at the supply convoys, and it was getting to be a situation where it was just a classic quagmire. It was shaping up to be that way. For the one thing that really saved them was there's no people's war. The great mass of the population is sitting it out, right? People are not. There's the Ukrainian army, there's some militias, but the mass of the people is not rising up and trying to block the roads or whatever. That never happened. So that kind of saved saved the day for Russia. But basically, Plan B is they redeployed, and they're still redeploying. But now they're going to try to close the curtain on the Donbass. So basically, there's about roughly still about 50,000 estimated 50,000 Ukrainian uniformed personnel that are in the Donbass, primarily stationed in Slavyansk and Kramatorsk area in Donetsk, as well as Lysychansk area in Lugansk. And they are slowly kind of being encircled from several sides. And everyone's sort of waiting for, the next big move to sort of, close the cauldron, so to speak. But the Russian strategy now is how are they closing that cauldron? Well, they have in particular, they have a very large presence now, and it's expanding every day in eastern Kharkiv province, and they're sort of moving slowly south and southeast, very very slowly. But what's the strategy now? The strategy now is they don't just move in and try to capture as much territory as they can. Just like they're not running a sprint. Okay, what they're doing now is they are drawing in the enemy and essentially trying to annihilate the Ukrainian forces that are standing against them with artillery, rocket artillery, tube artillery, airstrikes, missile strikes, special forces raids, so that when they do advance that extra kilometer, right, or take that next village, that the Ukraine forces are not there anymore because they're dead, or they permanently just pull back in a disorganized retreat, right? So it's a very systematic approach where now the Ukrainians, particularly in the area of Izum, and they're sending in, they're desperately sending in various units and pieces of units and reservists and draftees and whoever they can muster, and they send them in. These forces get chewed up by Russia, Russian artillery, Russian Russian special forces, operating at night to identify and lays the targets and so forth. And then they kill however many in some cases hundreds of Ukrainians within the space of a few days. And then the Ukraine just keeps sending more and more in because they have to close that. They have to close that gap. They've got to keep the Russians from advancing and to close off the Donbass. But it's very slow and methodical. What they're doing now is they're really chewing through the Ukrainian human strength, right? So instead of quickly taking territory, they're trying to grind down the Ukrainian human strength, the organizational strength. Just wipe out these, company by company, battalion by battalion, wipe out these Ukrainian forces that are being sent in against them. And then at some point, they will attrite and degrade the enemy to such an extent that then they can send in the armored spearhead, and no one's really going to be resisting it. It's just a mopping up operation. So that's the strategy now, right? Why not now that it's clear that the war's not going to be over today or tomorrow? Why hurry? Why hurry? So at some point, the Ukraine, the army's not that large, and at some point they're just gonna run out of quality veteran personnel that they can keep sending at Russia. So until that happens, Russia's basically gonna kind of sit tight and sit pretty and just continue killing them. And the Ukrainians aren't really doing very good at this right now. Because they are on the back foot. They're trying to desperately plug a number of holes with forces that, in many cases, are no longer first-rate forces. A lot of those have been degraded, or they're sitting trapped in the Donbass, and they're increasingly desperate. An increasing proportion of the personnel that are being taken prisoner by Russia in the Izum front are draftees. I'm not saying it's necessarily the majority, but an increasing proportion are draftees that had maybe 3 days or a week of training and were just sent to the front. And you can see that the Russians are starting to degrade the quality of the Ukrainian forces in this area, degrade their numbers, and eventually Russia will make the big offensive, but there's just no hurry. They're gonna take the time and just wear the enemy out as much as possible. And we hear a lot about this going on, and again in eastern Kharkiv province near Izum, but it's also going on in the south near Gulyapolye, which is somewhat east of Nikolaev, and it's basically northern Zaporozhye province, where again the same strategy. They're just taking it very, very, very slow, using artillery, using rocket strikes, cruise missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, special forces raids to throw the enemy into disarray, slowly but surely grind them down without risking a premature offensive, basically. And so that sort of we've covered the southern and the northern sector. And at some point soon, they're going to have big armored spearheads that come out of the north and come out of the south, and they're going to meet in the middle and close off the Donbass, and it's guaranteed to happen. But until then, they're taking it slow and trying to literally just kill as many Ukrainians as they can. Now, when is it that they're going to have the big offensive? We don't know. It could be the way it's going. It could be some more weeks. I mean, a lot of people have predicted. I tried to predict it. I thought it was going to be in April. Looks like I'm going to be wrong on that, probably. But the point is, it's going to happen when the Ukrainian forces are so degraded that they really have nothing to stand in the way and prevent Russia from sealing the cauldron on the Donbass. And at that point, they're going to seal it, right? And after the Donbass army group, the Ukrainian army group in the Donbass, is surrounded, and after it is reduced, it's pretty much game over. There's not much of a Ukrainian army left after that, right? All this junk that Uncle Sam and the Europeans are trying to send over, with its artillery and this and that, it almost doesn't matter, because there's going to be no one really that's really trained and veteran that can use this stuff, right? So on top of that, Russia has now begun to attack the railroads, right? We don't know the exact picture, because now it is illegal. It is illegal, if you're a Ukrainian citizen in the Ukraine, you can no longer take video footage of Russian airstrike damage, because people were putting that on the internet, and it was very bad for morale, and it was also very good for Russia to figure out how much damage they're actually doing on the ground. So the Ukrainians have made it illegal to post any of that. So we don't know exactly how much damage Russia has started to do to the Ukrainian rail infrastructure, but we know it's happening, and they have a surefire way of preventing the all of that junk that Uncle Sam and his hegemonic bloc in Europe, all that stuff that they want to send to the Ukraine to bail out the Ukrainians because the javelins didn't work. That stuff is not going to get to where it's needed in time, because the Russians are going to blow up the bridges. They're going to blow up the railroad bridges, and that's it. It's game over. That stuff is not going to get into the theater of combat and actually be used. It's just a desperation measure. It's a feel-good measure. It's going to make no difference to the ultimate course of the war. Just like the javelins made absolutely no difference. They remember they were supposed to be the great white hope that's going to stop Russia in its tracks, right? At least according to Fox News, and it never happened. So we're going to say the same thing, with all this other junk that they're sending. It's not going to make any difference at all. Really the outcome is sealed at this point. We're also starting to see talk within the Russian political system, not just by yahoos in the Communist Party or whatever, but actual ruling party, United Russia Party, parliamentarians, respectable people in Russia, talking about how they need to consider bringing the southern Ukrainian provinces, into Russia, which was not originally a goal of the military operation. But the fact is, what happened was, Uncle Sam raised the stakes, Europe raised the stakes, Europe basically froze Russian reserves, 300 billion euros worth of Russian central bank reserves that were basically stolen. And at that point, it's like when you give people nothing to lose, they have nothing to lose anymore. They might as well, they shed some blood to conquer parts of the Ukraine. They might as well hold on to them, indefinitely, because now it's like, again, they just have nothing to lose. They have no reason not to, and they're now putting up Russian flags in a lot of these southern Ukrainian towns and cities that are now under Russian control. They've taken down the Ukrainian flags. They're putting up Russian flags. That's a big symbol and a signal that they're going to stay. Okay, and what that means is the Ukraine is going to lose access to its Black Sea coast, and there's enormous mineral wealth, specifically oil and gas, that's offshore there, that is not being tapped yet, probably enough for a century or more of gas for Europe alone. So there's a massive benefit to keeping that part of Ukraine, and it's going to go to Russia again, because they haven't really thought this through very well. If they had just pressured Zelensky to cut a deal, Russia would keep the Donbass and Crimea, and that was it, and Ukraine could sort of stay in existence. But now they've raised the stakes so much that unfortunately that's just not going to be possible anymore. So that's all I want to say for today. Is basically overnight, Friday to Saturday. But I probably will not post this for another 24 hours. But Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you enjoy the rest of my blog. Thank you very much.